All right, guys, get your pen, your paper, get your Bible out. We're going to dive into some things about cleansing idea of immersed baptism, the idea of God bringing us through waters and bringing salvation. We looked at that pattern from Genesis to Jesus yesterday. Today, we're diving into the idea of cleansing, the idea of impurity and purity. Before we do that, though, we need to have one reminder about what this is. This is the Bible. This is not one book, but it is 66 different books separated into two core parts: the Old Testament in Hebrew, the New Testament in Greek. And so when we look at these, the best thing we can kind of start to think about is the Old Testament is like a magnifying glass of the problem with humanity. The Old Testament is story after story and following one general family line whom we know as the Israelites. And it's like being a big magnifying glass of here is the problem with humanity. The New Testament, indeed, is the solution to that magnified problem. And so when we're diving in today, we're looking at the Old Testament, and keep in mind, this is showing us the problem with humanity. This is really honing in on it. And it kind of sums it up in one idea. It's the idea of the problem with humanity is holiness, that we are unholy and that God is holy. And this is the real big problem here that is just kind of put a huge magnifying glass on in the Old Testament. From the very beginning with Adam and Eve, right, all the way through to the last books and the last prophets constantly giving words to the Israelites of saying we've turned away from God and things. So what does this word holy mean? Most of us just think of being like morally good person, or sometimes we think about like, oh, well, they're maybe a pastor or this, and so they are a holy man. But we need to break it apart and understand it in the way that the Hebrew writers meant it in the Bible, in the Old Testament. So the word for holy in Hebrew is kadosh. Kadosh is the word for holy, and in our language it would basically mean to be dedicated, to be set apart for a specific purpose or specific use or some reason that it's utterly different than anything else around it. It also means to be pure and to be clean. So it carries this idea of a dedicated thing. It carries this idea of set apart. It's very different than anything else. And it's got this one specific way or thing that it is. And so with that, because it is separate from anything else, it's not mixed together. It's pure and it's clean. And this is the big problem that we're presented with in the Old Testament, that magnifying glass goes on as it says that God is holy. If we were to say one core characteristic of God is that he's holy, he's dedicated, never changing and unchanging. He's other than anything else. He's not like any other being that there is, and he's pure and holy. He's not mixed up into other things. He's unchanged by the things around him. And so that's basically everything we aren't, right? Like, we are the most finicky creatures that seems that we are. We are mixed up. We are not dedicated to one thing. I mean, we're given so many other aspects of life to be dedicated in, and we struggle with those, marriage being the primary one. This isn't on marriage, is it? This is on water baptism. But indeed, we're quite the opposite. And the Old Testament is giving us story after story showing us, hey, here's the problem. God is dedicated, set apart, other, very different than anything else, and he is pure and holy. And that is what we are not. We have went away from that, from Genesis all the way through. And so the spotlight's being shined on this, and we need to be cleansed. We need to be purified. We need to be brought back into this dedication, this being kind of one with God again and set apart from the rest of what this world is. And that's the magnifying glass that baptism and the cleansing of baptism analogy shows us. So there's one book of the Bible that really points this out. We're about to dive into that.